data, well, actually a year and a half old data from OUTSA, they do an annual user study, shows that academic users preferred email alerts, substantially preferred email alerts, and even blogs over things like podcasts and videos for their content delivery vehicles. Students were a little bit more ahead of that curve in terms of adopting the newer forms like videocasts and podcasts, but still pretty far behind. And in the clinical arena, you see a similar picture with even less uptake, particularly from clinicians and things like RSS and videocasts. But this data is already a year and a half old. What's wrong with this picture is it's not even showing the Kindle and the iPhone. It's not showing any devices unless you think of the podcast as, the iPad is implicit there. So let's take a look at the market share for smartphones. We're talking a lot about the iPhone, and that's where the buzz is. But looking at the international market share, it shows that the Nokia family, which is shown in this graph as Indian operating system, is highly dominant. It's 45%, I think, or just under 50% of the market. BlackBerry and iPhone are actually fairly comparable in terms of market share. But again, this is data from 2008. The landscape is probably shifting so quickly that it's important to try to get as much up-to-date information as possible. There's less information on e-readers. This report just came out a week or so ago, and it's just estimating, but the estimate is that Kindle has about 45% of the market share in the U.S. But Kindle is very U.S.-focused right now. So, if your focus is international, there's limitations there with the Kindle. And it's important to keep up on the latest. Just a few days ago, Sony released their newest daily edition e-reader, and it's aimed right at the Kindle. It's got built-in wireless capability. It's got its own library finder app, so it partners with libraries to deliver free content directly to users. It's got a nice 7-inch touchscreen, which the Kindle doesn't have. So it's going to be very competitive, and I think it's just too early at this point to really pick a winner in the e-reader space. So with only minimal market intelligence handy, how do you really begin to navigate what the different options are? I think it's important to take a look from the publisher perspective and start with your content store. You can disseminate your content in several different ways. You can do it in the full text, which is probably your web-ready format that you tend to disseminate your full text content in. You can disseminate it in partial content, as in RSS feeds or e-talk alerts, for example. Or you could transform it into something new, create a podcast, a videocast, or a blog based on your content. Dissemination can then happen through many different channels. The general sort of web channels that we're all familiar with via a web browser would be, for example, your website or an aggregator site. Then there are storefronts like iTunes and Amazon. And then finally, you can layer on top of this special access modes, such as communities, social networks, or the devices that we're talking about, like an iPhone or a Kindle. And then there are relationships between these, of course. In order to deliver to the Kindle, you need to go through the Amazon storefront. And in order to deliver to the iPhone, you can either go through a web browser channel or through the iTunes App Store. And the choices that you make, even at the content level, can affect the cost. The cost to you. It's usually far more costly to create brand new content, to create a podcast or a video cast, than it is to repurpose the full text content you're already putting on your website. Automated alerts, on the other hand, are fairly cheap once they've been set up, and repurposing those in the Amazon store for delivery on the Kindle could be a lot less expensive. Storefronts have the promise of shiny promise of revenue, but so do web channels, and that's where pay-per-view and other e-commerce opportunities are generally cropping up. And then the top layer is the most specific, but it can also target specific audiences. It may be a higher effort to reach people using a Kindle, but if that's where your audience that's the device of choice for them, then that's where you need to be. If you've got an audience that's using Facebook, that's where you need to be. I think it's difficult to assess the return on the investment that you're making as you begin to delve into these new channels. It's important to know, where your readers are and what they're using. And I think a number of publishers are doing their own studies and doing their own polls and surveys of their readers to find this out. I think our panelists actually might be able to comment on that later, what sort of market research they're doing. But as you try to decide what choices you want to make in terms of different channels, I think it's really important to clarify your goals first. And just throw out a number of possible goals that you might have as a publisher: increasing your visibility or reaching new audiences. You might want to build your brand. Obviously, you may be interested in increasing your revenue. And so assessing how any one of these or any group of these channels will help you reach that goal, I think is a really critical first step. And then weighing that against the effort that's required. So just for example, this is a representative slide. It's not meant to be an actual slide. Each publisher, each of you would have to do this exercise for yourselves. But to assess, say, for example, if your goal is to increase the visibility, and these are the different channels that you're looking at, what's the effort versus the gain? Blogs, for example, may be a very high effort. It takes a lot to keep a blog going. It's a lot of editorial work, a lot of maybe perhaps research behind it, and it's new content on top of content you're already publishing. But it could substantially increase your visibility. RSS feeds, on the other hand, could also do that, but at a lower effort. And so, the exact location of these channels on a graph that you create yourself it's up to you. Maybe that you have an editor that is just dying to do a blog and has a lot of free time, in which case the effort would be much lower for you. Or maybe that you have an education department that's set up to make videos, and so again the effort there would be lower. But as you go through what your different goals are and plot the potential return for each of these different channels, I think you might see a pattern emerge that makes sense specifically for you in terms of where to place your effort. And you'll notice that in these last two, RSS and blogs seem to have quite a bit of return. But when you think of brand identity, RSS drops way down. The return there is much lower because RSS feeds don't contain much branding. Blogs, on the other hand, stay up at the top in terms of the return, but also effort. When it comes to potential new revenue sources, they are kind of few and far between. You're certainly not going to get a lot of revenue directly from RSS feeds, and probably not from a blog either. You might be able to charge for new transformed content, such as podcasts and videos, but we know that those actually usually take quite a bit of effort. The Kindle, there is the potential there for revenue, probably less so with the iPhone. So I'll talk a little bit about how I was doing in this space, because I think it will help understand what we think our publishers are interested in doing. And of course, like everybody else, we're starting with the Kindle and the iPhone. But our early focus actually is in 4 different directions. The first is this new platform that I mentioned, and the reason I bring it up is because it has enabled us to work more easily with the new channels. And the reason is it contains clean, well-structured content, XML, has the use of standards throughout. So it makes it a lot easier for us to interact with and utilize many of these new channels. The second is a generic mobile strategy, which is optimizing the publisher's website for small screens. And this will enable website access or content access through any sort of cell phone or generic mobile device. And the idea here is just to create a version of the website that has a lot fewer options, big links so that our fat fingers, don't end up being frustrating, and optimizing the use for current issues as opposed to, a website which would have the entire archive very handy and easy to access. Lightweight displays for lower bandwidth. So Highwire is doing both of those, and then, of course, we're focusing on specifically on the Kindle as an example of a category of e-readers, and the iPhone as an example of a category of smartphones. So with the Kindle and iPhone, we had to take a look at what the use cases are and make some assumptions. The assumptions we began with were that users would use the Kindle primarily to keep up with the current content. They wouldn't necessarily be trying to read all the back issues or conduct large-scale research projects using the Kindle. They would be more likely to be reading current issues. Likewise, with the iPhone, they would be more interested perhaps in reading current issues, but they also may use the iPhone for sort of spot lookup, on-the-job, instantaneous access to pieces of information. So we needed that extra component. And what we identified was that both the Kindle and the iPhone had both low-cost and high-cost options for the publishers. The low cost for the Kindle is just getting RSS feeds out onto the Kindle. The Kindle, Amazon has created a sort of do-it-yourself interface for this. It's very simple and easy to do. I believe they provide a 99-cent per month per subscriber fee, so that means, and they take 70% of that. There's that and $5 will get you a cup of coffee at Starbucks. But it is certainly a good first step. Then there's a higher cost full text delivery option, which is getting the content out there, and people can subscribe to the full text via the Kindle, via the Amazon store. On the iPhone, the low-cost option is just having a good website, because a well-formatted, cleanly designed website actually works on the iPhone, as found out when we started looking at our H2O sites on the iPhone. It's not ideal, but it certainly is certainly a good starting place. The higher cost is to build an actual application to deliver either full text or alerts through the iPhone. So we're working on all of those fronts at the same time. With the Kindle, publishers are already, Highwire hosted publishers, that is, are already getting the RSS feeds up and going through the Amazon storefront, and also selling subscriptions via the Amazon storefront to the full text. And we're working closely with Amazon to optimize that experience. Here are some screenshots of genome research on the Kindle, one of the Highwire hosted journals. It's not ideal. The images are not as good quality as, for example, you'd see on the web, but we're doing our best to try to optimize for the different Kindles that are out there. On the iPhone front, as I mentioned, the H2O sites already look pretty good on the iPhone. They function certainly, but we're also working on iPhone apps that will help deliver content both at the level of sort of like current alerts as well as full text to users. We feel the use case here is that people will be browsing and skimming and trying to quickly gather information, so we need to optimize for that. This is what an H2O site looks like, really without any further optimization on the iPhone currently. So it's fairly readable. And there are certainly advantages to viewing these on the iPhone, which is the interactivity of the Internet, as opposed to what you can do on the Kindle. So, what are the caveats and limitations here? John Sack, the director here at Highwire, said he felt like we were going back to 1995 in some ways. These devices are still very limited, just the way the web browsers were back in the day. But we're expecting that there'll be a lot of change. So investing heavily at this stage is certainly a little bit risky, since the landscape will be moving quickly. Things for publishers to keep an eye on include making sure that there's data integrity, keeping an eye out for content leaks, looking very closely at the licensing terms. The agreement, for example, with Amazon to offer full text through the Kindle there are some things to be concerned about there. And we're working with our publishers on sort of facilitating discussion with Amazon about that agreement and trying to make sure the licensing terms are acceptable. I think it'll take a little while before we understand the cannibalization here. Is there any, our subscribers, for example, who are subscribing to the full text via the Kindle, are they canceling other subscriptions? Is this incremental revenue, or is it cannibalizing other forms? And then, of course, there's the usage question. How do you track the usage on these different devices? It will be impossible to truly understand the usage in the way that you can with your own website, for example, with the Kindle. You can know how many people are subscribing, but you don't know at this stage what they're doing with the content. You can't tell what they're reading and when and that sort of thing. And even if you can get usage data back, if you begin to think of using 10 or 12 different channels all at once in addition to your own website, just pulling the data in all of the formats it's coming back to you in and trying to make sense of it would be very difficult. I think most of us have trouble keeping on top of the usage statistics we get from a website, let alone from, 5, 10 different other channels. And then, of course, there is that return on investment question, which is, bells and whistles that users won't pay for. There can be costs there on your side, and how much do you want to invest, particularly as many of these channels are so new. The Kindle specifically has a lot of limitations. It's a great device. I love my Kindle. I use it all the time, but it is fairly primitive still. The images are pretty limited in size and depth. Browsing is awkward, to say the least. It's also a single-use device. Unlike my iPhone, I don't carry my Kindle with me everywhere. So I use it just to read. My iPhone, on the other hand, I use to do all kinds of different things. It's a phone, it's a camera, it's a toy, it's a source of information, it's GPS, it's everything. So the Kindle, on the other hand, really does have that limitation. It's only in the U.S. The WhisperNet is actually fairly spotty. I think it's pretty good, but it is still spotty, as is the iPhone network. The requirements that you use the Amazon storefront is, something to be concerned about potentially, the control that Amazon has, and et cetera. There are a number of different things. I think the discoverability question is one that we should be examining. Most of us in this industry have done a lot of work on discoverability and optimizing websites for that, but the Amazon store is a large and sort of unfocused database of content, and trying to make sure that your content is getting in front of the right people at the right time can be challenging. Similarly, the iPhone has its limitations, the tiny screen. The network is spotty and slow. The text entry, $15 searches, those of you who have used one, you kind of need small pointy fingers in order to make it work perfectly. Again, dependency on the storefront to tie in with Apple. And then it doesn't tie in with your subscription system, so you can't bundle things. You can't say, here, get the content through the iPhone app, for free with limited time subscription or something like that. And again, the discoverability question comes up. Not to sound discouraging, as I said, we're focusing on these, and we see them as just the beginning of work to be done in the e-reader and smartphone area and the mobile device area in general. Not to mention work we're doing in many of the other channels that I mentioned, like Facebook and Twitter and things like that, print on demand and video, etc. But just getting started, for example, with the Kindle and the iPhone, both have very, as I mentioned, low or no cost options. This is a fairly risk-free way to get your feet wet. Getting your RSS feeds into the Kindle, for example, is very easy to do, and it's a good way to start to think about and examine the uptake and see whether or not this is a device that your users are using. Since the market research out there is fairly non-specific, it's not targeted towards scholarly publishing, as I mentioned earlier and showed with those graphs, it's really hard to know what people are using. And unless you're doing a survey of your own readers yourself, this may just be a good way to sort of test the waters. Making sure, assuming that you have your websites in a good XML format, getting them, checking out how they look on the iPhone and making sure that your users know that they can access the websites through the iPhone, but actually having to do much more in terms of optimization, again, is a good way to get started. If you do nothing else, make sure that your site is designed for maximum distribution through these different channels. And that's really about having clean content, using standards, and then just testing the dissemination through the different channels. Getting RSS feeds going, if you don't already have, they can be delivered to any mobile device. Also other channels. They can be packaged up in a widget and put almost anywhere on the web. So RSS feeds are multi-purpose, highly useful. And then utilizing existing distribution channels and storefronts, which is making videos, get them out there on YouTube, etc. Getting as I mentioned, the RSS feeds in Amazon. If you're making podcasts, putting them in iTunes. I mean, it's pretty obvious. So, finally, in summary, I've said it 3 times, and I'll say it again, investing in clean, portable content. Evaluating which opportunities match your specific user community, and so you're not running around making efforts in areas that folks just aren't, isn't applicable to your group, to your community. What's your user base really interested in? And evaluating which opportunities match your content, too. Certain types of content are not going to work as well on the Kindle as others. And understanding that and the limitations is really critical before you make large investments. Looking at the goals, as I mentioned, which are the goals that are the most important to you and assessing what the return on investment is. And then just getting started. Okay, thank you very much. And I'll take questions, I guess, for a minute or two before we turn over to the next speaker.
Yeah, the way we'll handle the questions is that if you have a question, please utilize the chat mechanism to send the host a message. And what I'll do is I'll go through and I'll collate those and incorporate some of the questions now for Kristen, and we'll be able to incorporate others after Govinder gives his talk and we get into the panel discussion section of the conference. Kristen, that was a very good presentation and I think very informative from a broad range of elements. There was a nice overview. One of the things you had talked about early on was the new wave of technology that's coming through. And you had shown some outsell information that showed a bit of difference in terms of how scientists were utilizing information, faculty were using information, and students were using the information. From your perspective and what you've seen in your experience at Highwire, are you seeing a definite generational shift that's happening with regard to adoption of the new tools and services?
We haven't done any of our own market research on this, so anything I'm saying on that would be speculative.
Okay.
But I think definitely there's a generational shift. I mean, I think we're seeing that in general. I joked recently at a conference, I read that people are more likely to look up medical information on Facebook than they are to, consult an actual physician. Folks of the age, between the ages of 15 and 25. So I do think that we're seeing a shift. I do think there's a higher level of comfort with different devices, but I really think there just really isn't enough research yet to know. I'll be interested to hear, I think Ken Anderson from the New England Journal of Medicine has done some market research in their areas, and maybe they can share a little bit of the information that they've gleaned.
That makes perfect sense. Question for you. You had a common theme about well-structured content being available. Could you describe for the audience, because we have a varied group, what you mean by well-structured or clean content?
Well, we chose for H2O to work with the NLM XML BTD, for example. It is, becoming probably the primary industry standard for content in scholarly publishing. And by that level of markup means that throughout the various dissemination places, you can that the tagging is clear and consistent. That's one basic thing that we've done to make sure that content is easily repurposable and easily deliverable in different channels.
Two more questions for you. The first has to do with putting content into Amazon, and in particular, do you have to pay for the RSS feeds that would be liberated through Amazon through the Kindle device to use?
No, and I don't believe there's any charge to put the RSS feeds on the Kindle. No. And then there is, as I said, there's a do-it-yourself interface to do it, so you really don't need to do much at all. It's quite simple. It doesn't require a lot of technical expertise.
So
that's why I said it's a great first step. Yeah.
And then you had made an observation that you felt that the sales potential associated with the iPhone was going to be somewhat less than the Kindle.
Yeah, I'm not saying that I project that for the future. I'm just saying right now the Amazon has enabled the sale of subscriptions through their storefront. As opposed to, they've actually made a special effort to do that. If you were to, for example, comparable to take the iTunes storefront and you created an app and tried to sell it, I'm just not sure that the return would be as high. The app would have to provide something that users are not getting from their other channels. And, again, I think we'll find out from talking to other publishers what sort of responses they've had from the work that they've done on that. But I think that there is more potential there with the Kindle.
With the iPhone?
I think there's more potential return with the Kindle than the iPhone now.
Very good. Thank you very much, Kristen. I'm sure we'll come back and have further questions for you after Gravinder has his presentation.
Great.
Our second speaker is going to be Gravinder Batra, and Gravinder was formerly CTO with Aptara. He has now moved on, and he is CTO with QEtech, an organization that is newly formed and specializing in electronic books. Gravinder, I'm going to turn the presentation over to you now.
All right. Thanks, Greg. I guess it was good. Kristen laid out very well in terms of what's happening in the market space, especially with Kindle and iPhone, where we see most of the hype today. What I've done is kind of following up on what Kristen talked about, is focusing more on just iPhone. But just to kind of lay the ground right, iPhone is only 11 to 12% of the worldwide smartphone market. Look at other players like Nokia has 42%, BlackBerry has 26% something. So there are other significant players. The data which is available today is mostly in the iPhone because that's where most of the activity is happening. And we feel definitely that the other platforms will pick up eventually. They're making a very concerted effort. So I'm going to share some data points again. These are from studies from Gartner and PwC. Where you see just in terms of a smartphone, how in general, people are spending more to upgrade themselves from regular phones to a smartphone. And the numbers are just staggering in terms of just how these sales have increased over just earlier this year. And then, again, this is an ongoing discussion regarding, especially compare Kindle to any smartphone, especially iPhone. Main point being that your iPhone or your phone, any smartphone, is with you all the time. And that's kind of driving more towards people are more willing to spend and download things on your phone because you carry it all the time. Again, keeping in mind that that's not your primary device. You still have your primary device being your laptop or desktop computer. This is a device which you use maybe more on the subway or train or bus, as you go from your home to work or back to home. But the numbers which you'll be looking at, it's pretty staggering in terms of the whole ebook market. It's mind-boggling actually, the numbers. And again, these are, as Christian is saying, there's not that much. There's a lot of research going on, but there, I think, more speculation in terms of whether this growth, rapid growth, is going to happen. And we see this kind of projected things to show it. But the current trending, it does seem to be pretty targeted towards the smartphone market just because of the usability, the portability, and most of the feature sets that you see on it. Again, just taking those same numbers, comparing between the print and electronic world in general and breaking it down between various categories, consumer, education, professional, so you see the difference in the growth factors. And it's interesting because most of the growth is consumer is an easy part of the content because you talk about fiction and non-fiction books, which are easy to port on a handheld device, which has very small real estate. Doesn't have complicated things like illustrations and things like that. But as you go towards education or professional content, there's a lot more going on there in terms of these more research papers or big, large medical books with illustrations and a lot of links and everything. How do you enable that? Would that have the same kind of impact overall in the growth as we're seeing in the consumer market? But the growth seems pretty substantial as you just look at in the last 5 years between all these markets consistently in terms of the growth in the electronic world. To pick up some, that's one of the points we were just discussing earlier. The big advantage in going from print to any kind of electronic world is that you have a lot more control in terms of getting usability data, especially with things like iPhone, where you can actually generate these analytics based on how people are using their phones or how often they're using or reading certain books. You can actually get that information on a very periodic basis. So the interesting part, this is a study I saw just earlier this week. Actually, it was pretty staggering. We all know that the mobile devices are mostly used for games, so that's no brainer. Everybody does that. You download games. So the chart that you see, the pie chart on the right, it shows you basically all the categories which are there on the iPhone. The second part was that the games are 19%. That's okay, fine. That's everyone probably guessed that. But e-books are second to games. So 40% share of the total apps which are there on the iPhone. So that was quite mind-boggling because that means people are tending towards reading more books. The books are in general categories, any kind of content, whether it's a reference content, whether it's research papers, they're tending to read more on their mobile devices and spending more time on it as they're doing it. It was pretty interesting, and then if you compare that to just the sheer number, the growth which has happened in the number of apps on iPhone, again, I'm just limiting right now our discussion to iPhone only. So you see that a huge growth has happened from January to July, and that continues to go. And we expect to go at about 100,000 applications by end of 2009. And based on some discussions and this we are having right now with some of the consumer publishers, it could be much larger because the various models being discussed, how to put the content there, whether it is a single book, a single journal, or it's part of a library. So publishers are trying many different things, and that's why you see the huge increase in the number of applications, the e-book applications on the iPhone. And this is even more interesting. So as I was mentioning earlier, you can actually track user sessions based on analytics that you put into your apps. And these analytics let you basically as soon as somebody opens it, because these are all Wi-Fi devices, you don't have a user information, but you can track how many unique users are actually using your application and how long they're staying and how many sessions they have. So through those analytics, this was interesting if you see the chart, how much growth has happened from just April to July. 300% growth in terms of just e-book sessions. That means more and more people again pointing towards are actually tending to read books or any kind of reference material on their iPhones. And in this July itself, tracked nearly 3 million active users, which is again a pretty staggering number in terms of how many people are actually spending time on the mobile devices. So these are all, I think, just stats analytics which are pointing towards there is an increase towards usage of a device which is with you all the time. And plus also it's more multi-purpose. It's not just you're reading books on it, you can play games on it, but it's also your phone. solve your email device, and just all sorts of multi-purpose things that you can do with it. So that makes it much more interesting in terms of what is there. What I'm going to do is now, I don't know how many of you have actually seen that, I'm going to use a simulator to just showcase a few of these different things. Again, the reader which we have developed. So to showcase what different models are going out there, and some things that we're working with some publishers. So the first application I'm showing is, so this is a way where you can put your multiple books in one application. So what you're doing here is allowing the user to buy certain amount, whether it's books or journals, or maybe it could be like backlists of your articles. So you let them buy your application with certain amount of content in it. And then the GUI, the interface can be modified. This is just an example to show how content can be structured. And then in this case, this is where all your content is. And then the top shelf here shows what content you're reading. So if I click on any of the content, it allows me to show it organizes your content, and you can click on it, and then you see a cover, and then as you're reading the book, all you're doing is using your finger to swipe the pages, and you simply go across the page like as if you're reading on an actual book. Now, in this case, this reader is formatted to look very good. So you have a drop cap, looks very nice. All the HTML values in terms of publishing is very good. So you see a very well-defined page. There's the parchment look and everything. But then there's limitations. This is using a PDF approach, which allows the page to look very good. You can have things like table of contents, which allow you to jump from one chapter to another. It also allows you to put a bookmark when you're done with the book, so that if I go back into the same book, it will take me to the same page where I was there. But if I want to do other things, like some of the stuff Krista was talking about, where you need to do more research and things like that, where you need to go out of the application or do search and everything, then the PDF becomes a limitation. So you see some readers out there which are using PDF, but they are more focused towards users who want to look the pages to be crisp and then give a more reading experience as compared to other readers. The model that people are using is, it could be, this is one model where you can have multiple books in an app. And with the new operating system, OS 3 of iPhone, it allows you to let the user buy a basic application with a certain amount of content. And this actually works very well in terms of subscription model. Then as you publish new content, they have the opportunity to buy, as the new content is being published, and they pay incrementally. So rather than charging, selling the app for a large amount, you sell it for a minimum amount, and then you use a subscription or what they call an in-app purchase model to, purchase content as it's being published by the publishers. So this particular, however you group your content works very well. And you see a lot of different designs there. Different applications you see online are like Stanza, Scroll Motion, Barnes & Noble has their own app now. So those are all similar to this model where you're putting a lot of content in an online store and some which you have already purchased in your app, and then allowing in a model where you can actually keep generating more revenue as you go from, as you publish new content. And in the same style, you can also have like a single book, so it doesn't have to. So this is where the, another point Tisha mentioned is the issue everybody's having is discoverability. How does a consumer find, especially in this, online store where you have hundreds and thousands of books there? How do they find the book or the author or the title they're looking for? It's actually very difficult. So the publishers are actually more varied towards right now single books apps, basically. So you have one book, and that's a standalone app. From a consumer perspective, that may not be the right thing, because if I'm buying 10 books, I have 10 icons sitting on my iPhone or iPod Touch. But from a discovery perspective, that's very good, because if, as a consumer, I'm looking for a certain thing on iTunes, I'll find it right away, because I can search for that title or author, and it's going to, it's easier to find. Also it does is you can promote, so what publishers are doing is they're selling a single book, but then they're using, things like that where they can put other books and cross-sell. So any clicking on any other book takes it back to the iTunes store, and they can buy the book from there. So these are the two varying models that various publishers are using in terms of how to sell book content online, whether through an online library where you have multiple books, or whether you have single books. I'll show you something which we're working right now, pilot with ATS. So this was the initial pilot. We're working a revised one right now. But in this case, what we did was just to pick up something what was from there, just to represent, what appears on the journal page, and then use the same PDF model. So in this case, ATS is physics, so heavy math. So you can format pages much better in terms of the math and everything using the same kind of engine that you use for your print. So the formatting and the math comes out very nice. But the problem in this case is, again, you need to be able to, you see the links to reference there, but I can't click it because it's a PDF, and in this iPhone where it becomes an image, then it becomes something which you can't really use. So increasingly what you're seeing is, as customer meeting, either using pulling out the journal papers in the Safari model. So it's an app, but what it does is actually lets you go to the website and just open the content there. So from here, we looked at how you can do things different. So the other model which is appearing is using XML directly. So I'll show you a model of so this is a it's a trade example, but has a lot of those qualities. So this is a book from Hachette. This is an EPUB directory loading. So this is not a PDF in this case, and it had something like 350 footnotes in it, which is kind of similar to what you deal with, what do you do in that case? How do you, go through that kind of content? So this is, XML and sorting, so it's kind of similar look and feel what you can do. But other features, because it's XML, you can do is, I can do search, so I can click on the search term, and when I click on the search, so it goes through it and gives me all the hits, and if I click on it, it lets me where those words are mentioned. So XML allows you a lot of those features, like you go to the online store, you can have multiple bookmarks, and you can annotate wherever the content is. If you've done any annotations, it lets you store all that, and then obviously then you have the TOC as well. So there's a lot more capabilities in terms of what you can do with an XML-based reader as compared to just a simple PDF-based. So that's where we're seeing the more gravitation towards, most of the content is going towards, that kind of a model. So the other example, again, with respect to just showing a journal example, this is a very early example. Again, it's probably working with it's your physics publishing. So the same model, I'm going to just jump to something I can show. So in this case, because this is XML directly. Now, the problem sometimes what happens is when you click something within a book or a chapter, it launches to Safari, and then in Safari you can view it. And when you're done with Safari, then you lose where you were in the article or book. So in this case, if I click on the references, actually it opens up a dialog box where I can actually scroll to all my references and see where they are. And if I click on any of those references, it's going to take me to that particular website. So it loads up the content while you are within a specific app rather than letting you go out and launch Safari. So in this case, it's launching Safari right now, and it's going to pull up that journal content in a second. And the cool feature here now, what the technology allows is, so I'm able to go to Science Direct and I can see, what that article was about, what was being referenced. When I'm done, I simply click on the back button, and I'm back where I started. So I've not lost my position, even though I've gone to Safari and researched what that reference was about and what the article I can read the abstract and things like that. So there's now the technologies available where it's allowing you to use XML to actually do a lot more things. So basically, the models are, that's back to just talking about, what different models are going on. And as Kristen talked about, it's difficult in terms of ROI, especially if you look at the professional market. The trade market is very clear. Publishers are selling books actually at the list price right now. I think eventually there will be some pressure in terms of maybe even reducing it further. Seeing the consumer buying methodology, they tend to buy more things which are in the $99 to under $5 versus, something around $10. But the models, it's interesting, in this economic time what people are using is how can they at least test the model without actually spending any kind of money. So the various ROI models that we are seeing, it varies from depending on whether you're a trade versus professional publisher. But in the trade market especially, it's a very popular model is that you are partnering with a digital distributor or a reseller. And the reseller is actually taking care of putting in all the upfront cost in terms of taking your content and mapping it to, it's most likely it's already in XML. And then it may be mapped to a standard which, everybody's developing their own standard. But it looks like, everybody's now again started moving towards EPUB as a standard. Sony made a big statement that they're now going to have their proprietary format and move to a more standard EPUB format. So the reseller has developer's reader. They're already a registered developer on the iPhone or any other mobile devices. And then they take care of doing everything. Apple jumps in doing everything in terms of maintenance. They host the content, they collect the money, they give the financial reports and everything. And then the publishers are doing like a revenue share model with the reseller. So in this case, there's no upfront cost from a publisher perspective. The risk is being taken by the resellers. And then, they get the return of income based on, how much selling happened. Now, the other model is where, especially in, we're having a lot of discussions with respect to especially research or journal articles, where, how do you, again, very good point to raise, how do you connect that with your subscription? You already have subscription out there. It's very difficult to tie an iPhone, how that model works with the existing subscription. So in many cases, your discussion is about it's more about technology and being out there and value add to your members. So in that case, you do the same thing, partnering with a distributor, but in this case, there is no revenue coming in, so there can't be a revenue share model. So there's more of you selling content for free. But then you could have fixed fee in terms of just management and maintenance, how you're doing it. So it's a very good model in terms of publishers trying to stay away from investing too much by putting internal teams, but more going with people who are, providing service. And there's quite a few people out there who have been, providing these services and who are basically taking published content and putting it on the mobile devices. Now, the third model is obviously creating a team internally and maybe using freelancers rather than in-house people, where there may be a mixture of people. I've seen it in very few places this being done because, one, there's a very new platform. That means people are still not established and everything. There's always something new happening. So I see most of the people more focused towards, partnering with somebody rather than doing it themselves. But there are people who are looking at, maybe we can partner and do it internally. That connects to the last point on the slide, branding. But that's for some publishers very critical because in the first two models, because it's the reseller who has the license, for instance, iPhone. So when they sell the content, even though it may have the imprint name, the title author, everything, the copyright is there, but it shows the developer name as the reseller name, so it's not your own imprint. So that's where, if you're more concerned about, having a branding, so then that doesn't work out because you are under somebody else's brand. The other alternative we started, seeing now is that you can do that too, that the reseller actually gets a license with, working with you in your own name. So then in that case, they're doing everything what they're doing, but when they upload content, it's under your name. And that goes back to another model which, I'm having interesting discussion of just hearing people out, is, for instance, the STM is a huge, market. Should there be, each society, for instance, have their own app, and then that app is used to, send content out for their own journals only, or it should be like an STM app which has content coming from everybody. So from a consumer perspective or researcher perspective, I have only one place to go to look for content. But again, it goes back to the same point, discoverability. Is it easy to do that within the single app, or to do it in a multiple apps? So right now, what I see is people tending to more, the test ground, just do their own applications or do single books or their own journals in one app, and then I think the model is evolving, and as the stores become better, then we should see things changing. And think as I just demonstrated through use of PDF and XML. So XML is how people are now moving towards more because also just a lot more flexibility for what you can do in the content. And the model which is evolving is because you're doing a lot of other things as well. So you need to use something which not just doing for mobile devices but everything else as well. But from XML, the EPUB is becoming key. It's fast developing a standard which we could never get to that place. And the EPUB is basically an XHTML, so it's not a very difficult model in terms of it's a step down. So any XML D2D schema that you're using today, you can automate to a very high degree to go to any of EPUB status. So, and some details in terms of what EPUB means, but it's basically a group of files which contains your content and metadata information and some other markup information which allows the readers, whether it's the mobile devices or even readers like Sony and Kindle, to really actually use that to display information on the readers itself. Just a quick thing on QTech, as Greg mentioned, me and three of us we founded Atara, and then we just stepped back and come up with so much happening in the digital world, and just created this QTech. But we are one of the many players who are playing exactly the same service. There are a lot of people who are out there trying to help from a book. The keys, what you have to look for is there are a lot of players, a lot of developers sitting in the garage doing it from a technology angle. That's great. You can see a lot of things, features and everything. But the key part is that you want to be somebody who can sustain in terms of the growth, in terms of large amount of content you want to publish. So, and also understanding of content. So there are quite a few players there actually who are coming from a publishing background, not just technology background. I think that becomes key. And I think long term, you need to look at not just iPhone, not just Kindle. I think you need to be able to make sure that you'll be able to send content on multiple channels and then see, how you see between different models. Thanks, Greg.
Okay, very good. Pravinder, before you come off of the desk sharing piece, one of our audience members had inquired whether you could show some of the equations in the ATS publication that you were showing in the simulator.
Yes, I can. There's actually a pretty long version. I'll just have to navigate through it. I think it's at the end of the article. So just give me a few seconds there.
And this is using the PDF technology.
Correct. This is PDF technology. I mean, you see the illustrations there. I'm just talking past here. But you can, the illustration, everything, you can click and enlarge and everything on it. And the math, in this case, is typed within it, but you can click as an image and then enlarge it. So this is an example of equations.
Right. I agree with you that the landscape is changing rapidly with regard to experimentation and people looking at different methodologies for delivery. The PDF methodology, the XML methodology is something that I think is the first place that people look at. I have seen a very interesting piece with regard to equations, and after it's been ported so that actually TeX and RAW-TeX can be displayed on an iPhone. And the equations end up reselling whenever you go through and look at that. So it's a landscape where there's a lot of technical development going on right now. You've advocated for the EPUB route as being the route that you are most excited about, it seems, from the description you said. Could you elaborate on that a little bit about where you see the power that's associated with EPUB and how that would be a benefit to the folks who are listening in today?
Sure. I think the biggest thing is that, the industry needs a standard just to simplify things. You're not looking at multiple file formats because that becomes a nightmare in terms of what standards you should follow. And the biggest, I think, just the news which came out last week that Sony is going to adopt EPUB directly. That is the big push towards the standard that's being developed. So the advantage becomes that even though my before presentation was more on iPhone and everything, but I'm now stepping back and talking from not just mobile devices, but your ebook readers as well. So you, as a publisher, want to make sure that you have one XML, but then you go into another format which actually goes to everything. So EPUB today if we're using that for readers on your smartphones, the same EPUB can go to your Sony reader, can go to your Kindle. So it's been developed into a standard that means, once you're not checking multiple formats, because even though it's an automated transformation, there's still some QA involved, making sure everything transforms correctly. And if each device, each manufacturer is having their own third-party formats, and each reader, because you may be working with multiple readers, have, their own third-party format, it becomes QA nightmare to make sure that your content is not losing out something as it goes from one format to other. And the other part is just, the development happening in terms of others getting involved in it. And, as you talked about tech, there's a lot of connection with respect to MathML support going to EPUB. So EPUB, even though it started with simple trade, fiction, non-fiction content, is fast getting into more journals articles as well as college books, which are much more complicated than the simple fiction books.
I agree with you. I think it's an interesting progression path, and kind of dovetails in as well with what Christian was talking about with regard to adopting clean content and XML standards. So if you have a good foundation, as she was describing, potentially based off of the AML publishing DTD, which many SDM users are climbing onto, presents a very viable path, I think, for the different distribution channels and options that you were proposing. Okay, thank you, Ravinder. What we're going to do now is we're going to move into the panel session associated with this session. And what I'd like to do is to open things up first to Clint Anderson. Observations, comments about the presentations, and questions.
Oh, okay. Caught me off guard. Sorry. So it's about both presentations. A couple of high-level things. I was just scribbling notes about what I was seeing here. One of them seems to be that this is all somewhat about form and function, and we're talking about taking traditional forms and putting them on devices that have somewhat different functions. And that, to me, seems like we're not really making the whole step, that we should look at the devices as they should be, not as new receptacles for things that we're used to doing. So that's just one observation. I also wondered, just as I was thinking, I wondered what Christian and Govinda would think about this. If you both were essentially technologists talking here, what do you think, or have you seen authors, editors, and designers engage with these devices, and do they think differently about them?
I've met quite a few authors at the BEA, for instance. And I'm seeing a huge number of authors actually moving towards even self-publishing on just these kind of platforms. They're seeing a larger value sometimes. But I think from what I see, authors, they like to get their content out to a lot larger audience, and they're feeling like if you can take content, do it in a different fashion, maybe going back to old ways of publishing, like in a different stage in Shakespeare where the content was serialized rather than the whole book being published.
Right.
They're seeing now certainly there's more to do than just simply writing a book and getting it out. The print is still key in terms of it's not going away, but they just see a lot more things you can do. Just to quote on that, so there's a book we're working on, which is What to Eat with What You Drink. I'm working with authors directly. It's a great book. It looks wonderful, a lot of illustrations, but it's impractical to put the whole book on iPhone. So what they work with, can you make it in such a way that if I'm sitting at a restaurant ordering a dish, and I want to know what point to go with it, I can just pull out my iPhone and quickly look it up, and it takes me directly within 2 or 3 clicks to get there. And with the technology, with all the things, search engine and everything on iPhone, you can do that today. So I think the author community, I see, is very excited about it. But again, there's a lot of others who are skeptical about the whole thing and very concerned about the DRM and everything as well.
I just would add, Highwire doesn't have direct contact with the authors of the content that we host. The publishers that we work with have that kind of direct contact. But I did just recently read a blog post from an author who was sort of identifying many of the advantages of a Kindle, but also pointed out that the Kindle, and I would say even more so with the iPhone, changes the dynamic of reading, such that if you're in the middle of a book, you can jump to another publication so quickly and easily that the author doesn't have the same captive audience that they do when you're sitting in a print book. If the author mentions another book, you may just click over to that book and never come back. And I thought that was sort of an interesting point to make. From the author's perspective, it may change the way people author because of that kind of the permeability and the sort of cross-pollination that occurs with the content being so hyperlinked.
Right. And then one thing that also struck me during the presentation, especially when talking about the iPhone, and maybe we're missing the obvious a little bit here. Kristen, you talked about how email is so heavily preferred, and it seems like the iPhone has only cemented email in our lives more because it's tight integration with that. And are we as publishers missing an obvious advantage we could have there by using that integration point? What do you think about that?
I'm not sure exactly if I know what you mean by...
Well, are we sending enough, right, if we want to get our content on the iPhone, you could send an email.
Right. Well, I think that's absolutely true. I mean, I think leveraging the existing channels that we have, like email alerts and RSS feeds, is just an obvious first step. I mean, that chart that I showed from Alcel shows that that's still the preferred content delivery method for most of the researchers and the clinicians that were done in this survey, and they surveyed thousands and thousands of end users. And I think that landscape will change, but I think for now, absolutely, we should be utilizing it.
And it seems interesting that I would bet, and I think this is generally true, we send emails presuming that they're going into Outlook and that somebody's going to link to a web browser often. So we send a table of contents, essentially. When email may actually behaviorally be moving much more to these devices, and people may want a different experience.
Right. One other thing, actually, on the iPhone especially, they have what they call push notification service, which goes with the subscription model. So rather than going into email, actually you can, as you publish a new issue, you can send push notification to all the people who have subscribed to it. So they get like a small text message kind of thing, irrespective of whether they are in the app or not, telling them a new issue is now published and they have, flexibility to go and check it out and download whatever they want. So there's a lot of possibilities now available.
And I'd say that as publishers begin to develop apps for users on the iPhone, to consider, I think the temptation, of course, will be to develop a single app for every single publication out there, assuming that readers only read that one publication. But, of course, we know that readers may want apps that are cross-publication, cross-publisher, cross-platform, and helping enable them to do real research using these applications, I think is something we should be thinking about rather than sort of recreating some of the silos that we've created in the Internet space.
Right. So we've been on the Kindle since May, and it's done much better than we thought it was going to. I use the we as a plural. There are individuals in the group who thought it would do quite well, and they're happy that it did. We have the full journal on there, and it's been very successful, but we are getting, because, again, it's the same content moved to a different device, so it's the same essential form and function, but just put in a different container. We're getting subscribers who are requesting some sort of special deal that they have both. So I think that's another reason to move, when you move to a device, to move away from just what you're doing and to customize it for the device. Kristen, I had another question for you, if I can. The content store model that you had, do you see more things as far as blogs and other content flowing into that?
I think so. I think people are going to pay for convenience. And again, this is speculation, but I think people will pay for convenience and for a certain amount of convenience comes from aggregation. So as far as content stores, Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you meant storefront. You mean the actual content store of the publisher.
Right.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, we're already seeing that a lot with the publishers that we work with, that the definition of content itself is changing, and it does include all sorts of different things. Things that we've thought of as data supplements may now be, content or articles or chapters or something like that. So I think there's a very fluid definition.
Right. And then I was interested to see that you had podcasts as being less work intensive than blogs, and I just disagreed with that.
Well, you would know.
Maybe so, but I think putting an audio program together, everything I've experienced with that, as far as scripting, voice talent, editing, posting, writing a blog post around it, essentially, makes it much more intensive. So I just wanted to reflect on that for folks.
Well, and I appreciate that because, I haven't actually created a podcast myself, so I wouldn't have that first-hand knowledge. And I think what I meant with those graphs was for folks to think about how that effort would work in their organization. And as I said, for somebody, a blog might be very, very straightforward. For some other organization, the blog and keeping that up on a daily basis would actually be a huge amount of work, whereas a podcast you might do once a quarter or once a month or something like that. So I really think it depends on how you approach it. And for everybody, it will be a little bit different. So you'd have to adjust those sorts of graphs to suit your organization.
Right, and I think it's interesting, too, especially with the ease you can start blogs and how much talent you can have in a blog. I think the tendency among publishers is to bundle everything into one sales piece. So, one product. So this is the blog of Journal X, this is the podcast of Journal X, this is the video feed of Journal X, and then, I think we're going to have to stop thinking that way and start thinking about, this blog is going to be its own commercial offering. So that's just something that, the devices and the outlets are there. I think we have to differentiate ourselves internally as well in order to make it a commercial success. So that's it. That's all I have, Greg.
Yeah, that's a very good comment to make a very clear sense, I think, from the standpoint of what publishers need to look at with regard to being able to distribute and then get a return on the investment for the content that they've pulled together and prepared. It's an interesting point of contrast also from the standpoint of Gravinder's discussion that he's had with individuals about should you create single apps going through or should you go through and look to have one SDM app in which you can be able to have everybody port content into. And I think that pathway to get to a single app would be very, very difficult to go through to justify economically because it lowers the value add that you're talking about. Is that right, Kim?
Well, I think it could work. I think that for publishers to think about, at what point is your journal boundary? Where do you invoke your journal's boundary? And where do you say we're doing something else that we have to commercialize separately? I think is a consideration. And then as far as the devices aggregation of those things, that would probably be an independent issue.
The other panelists that we have on today is Rita Hammond. Rita, would you like to interact here with Gravinder and with Kristen? And you can certainly draw Kim back into the fray for you.
Sure, of course. I'm from the APS, that's the American Physiological Society, versus the APS that Gravinder was showing on the iPhone, just to make that clear. I think that certainly there are Kristen and Gravinder who took this from two different perspectives, Kristen from a bit of the overview, and then Gravinder more focused in on how this might be done, which is very useful for me. I'm coming from the perspective of looking at options for delivery of full text to mobile devices and really being in an early exploratory stage. We are planning to do a survey, and Ken, I think you might have already done one, of our membership, which is about under 11,000, And I think it's important what questions we asked because there was an interesting distinction made. I don't know if it was intended to be made specifically, where Kristen indicated that she said that there perhaps was less revenue opportunity for iPhone, and whereas Govinda focused a lot on the iPhone. I took a straw poll of our publications committee and our council, which is about 25 people, and theoretically there was a great deal of interest in iPhone/BlackBerry types of full text information. What the expectation is, of course, for the business model for this is another story. The expectation may be that it comes with your subscription. And I think talking about the fact that this is really not connected to a subscription is an interesting issue because that's kind of new. And it also is interesting that the mobile device has been a natural home for the book, which was late to adopt the web. And the journal is kind of in an opposite situation. Their journal was early to embrace the web, but late to embrace the mobile device. And I think the nature of journals being delivered in segments versus the book not has something to do with that as well, and the way a book is read versus often journals are researched has something to do with that. And which is why I was particularly interested in the concept of an STM app, because I was thinking that, well, if our users, let's say, wanted to read our GI journal, which is one of 7 of our consolidated journals, they would probably want to read the gastro journal too. And from a user perspective, it's going to be kind of awkward, probably, to get all of the stuff that they may want to read down to their mobile device. And I don't know if there's any more comment that anyone wants to make about that. But the other thing I was thinking about, I found Kristen's slide about the downsides of Kindle and iPhone rather daunting, and I was wondering if it was just too early in general to start approaching some of this. And anyway, some observations there. I've got a few more, but I'm just wondering if Kristen or Kent or Govinder could comment on any of that, particularly the timing.
Ms. Kristen, I just comment on the Kindle versus iPhone in terms of revenue. I mean, my thinking, and I'd be happy to hear what other people think about this, is that right now, the way the business models are working, in order to get full text, say, journal content on the Kindle, you have to pay. You have to subscribe via the Kindle. But to get full text on the iPhone, you can just go to a web browser on your iPhone. And if you want to go and get a special app to download to do that, I'm just not sure how much people will pay for that, since they can actually get to the journal another way. And they may have the expectation that that app is very low cost or free because it's serving in the publisher's interest that you're getting to the content. So that's sort of why I was thinking that. But these are very early days. And as you say, I mean, it is a little daunting to see the limitations and some of the restrictions in the way that the business models work. But I think we're just going to see a lot shift and change very quickly. It doesn't mean you shouldn't get your feet wet now, but it definitely means keep your eye on, for example, making sure that what you do is part of a more generic mobile strategy. And that you're considering that at the same time that you're making steps specifically for the iPhone.
Is it hard to do a generic strategy, however, when the technology, as I understand it, as I think, behind iPhone, BlackBerry, and Kindle are different?
It's tough to have the generic because, again, these platforms also support different, like iPhone uses Objective-C and BlackBerry and use Java. So there's a lot of variations there. The one thing which could be common is the content, right? How you're getting content onto these multiple devices. So that's one thing which you can actually focus on, going to a common standard. So EPUB, for instance, works with Kindle as well, even though it does need to go to a transformation to a clear format. Another, I think it's going to be interesting to see how, I mean, I'm seeing people coming together, like in trade, for instance, the publisher saying, hey, let's get together and do one thing rather than all of us doing things in our own, publishing environment. So I think it's going to take a lot more time to get people together. But there's an interesting comment that I've always been in journals world for the last 18 years, and journals always have been, keep saying journals have been pioneering XML and all that technology, and it seems like they're getting behind the books right now.
Yeah. One comment, Kristen, that you made, that John Sack made, in terms of being in the 1990s with some of this, and I was thinking similarly in the sense that downloading to a mobile device is perhaps a little bit akin to pay-per-view type of system, but more so going back to the individual subscription. And after having institutions pretty much predominate subscriptions the past nearly decade now, one way of kind of looking at this could almost be seen to see this as an individual subscription if indeed users are happy to have the content downloaded in a different format, being the same content, whereas Kent mentioned that they may not be, and certainly would want a discount. But I was wondering, in the ideal world, if any of this could ever coordinate with subscriptions, whether that could happen, whether through a subscription there could be offered the opportunity to have the content delivered to the mobile device. Whatever the business model is would be dictated by the cost structure for that kind of application at the time.
I think by subscription, I think you're saying institutional subscription.
Yeah.
Yeah, tie-in with institutional subscription. I mean, I'll just comment
conceptually, and I know that's a long way off, but it would seem, probably from a user perspective, at least now, seem logical.
I do know there are libraries that are loaning Kindles. I mean, I think there is activity in this space. The Sony Reader has a library app as part of it. I don't know how that will affect the business model. But I actually have John Sack right here, and he can make a comment as well.
Sure, Rita. It's a good question. I think one of the things that's attractive about Kindle is that it does sound like or feel like an individual purchase device. Right now, in our conversations with Amazon, there's no technique, technology, or interest in figuring out anything about institutional subscriptions there. However, there is a backdoor, and in the way Kent even alluded to it, you can put content on the Kindle through drag and drop from your desktop or through wireless transmission. So if you have access to the full text on your web browser, you can email it to yourself on your Kindle. And in that way you could be reading documents and say, well, I want to read this one tonight on the train, and just put it on your Kindle waiting for you when you have some spare time. So I think right now I think the Kindle is primarily an individual subscription purchase. The iPhone, on the other hand, seems to have some other possibilities because you, as the application developer, have access to the network that it's running on. So as we're designing our iPhone apps now at Highwire, we expect that if a person is using, let's say, an app that takes them to the Physiological Society's journals, your journals on the iPhone, that the app would recognize that they are sitting on a network that has access to an institutional subscription and would let them in. So I think the iPhone can provide individual or institutional just as a web browser can.
Bender or Kent, do you have any additional?
Sure. I mean, I think, Govinda, I'm also reaching out to the manufacturers directly, talking about Kindle and Amazon. So I've been talking to Apple and just recently had a meeting with the CTO at Nokia. So I think they have interest in terms of, okay, how can it work? Because there are specific markets where you need to have some kind of integration with the subscriptions. So iPhone now didn't even have a subscription model. So all we need is to be able to tie in with the existing model. But even today, there are subscription models that exist. It does feel like, and I've heard it many times, like you can view an article when you are at your lab or in library or wherever, and when you go home, you have trouble, using this, same subscription on your home computer. Actually, the mobile devices could be better because they have better technology, so they can actually have access to it. So, I think, as you said, it's not going to be immediate, but there are solutions being created which will allow to tie in subscription. And I think what I'm seeing right now is, as the technology is being developed and manufacturers supporting it on these mobile devices, the best way is to just test what works. Really, how does the content look like on such a small device? Because it varies from society to society, what kind of content you have. And then what I'm seeing is people just saying, okay, maybe right now, take a journal or a publication where we can just give it for free. And it's already free on the web, so it doesn't really, make any difference with respect to subscription policy. So that could be a short-term gap. As the technology being developed, you at least are able to see your content and, show it to members that we are there. But as the technology develops, we can connect it with the subscription.
A couple of more observations on that, I think the point has been made very clearly by both Kristen and Govinda that certainly mobile devices have been dominated as a consumer model and a book model, and it's still driven really very much so in that way. And it doesn't work all that well. In some cases it does for textbooks, perhaps, and monographs, but it doesn't work that well as it exists now for journals. That's kind of early days where you're doing research. Some of is it HTML or EPUB version you had shown, Govinda, helps with that. But we're really kind of far away from issues of investigator workflow, of when and where you use it, of how much content you would want, of how it appears and what the technical requirements are, and the fact that you would probably want to have similar content as the example I gave between a Gastro journal and our journal, where that's not really relevant with books. And I was also just wondering how much is being done and how many organizations out there, the big guys, are interested in the scholarly market, because there is a lot of work to be done to fashion these devices so that it's really applicable to scholarly publishing and journals.
I think what I'm seeing is, you're right, there's more concentration on the books. That's why they're taking the lead, and especially the fiction, non-fiction books, because just the amount behind it, like in selling it for $9.99 or something like that. So there's been a big chunk coming to the, like Apple takes 30% of that, so a big chunk coming to them as well. For the scholarly market, it's in terms of, what are we talking about in terms of article and how, can you generate more revenue just selling it? So I'm having it's an interesting discussion if I talk to the society where it's more about value versus a commercial publisher, where they're seeing this as an avenue of maybe this could be in addition to the subscription. So actually we can reach out and build its own revenue model. Then it can actually become more substantial in terms of going and trying to create a model which is more specific to journals. So I think I'm having a lot of discussion with different people in terms of what their perspective is, how they want to take the content further. Technology is there. It's a business model which is key to link to it, so that you can be in line with what you are doing. Another just food for thought could be that rather than doing full text, you just do head and tail. So just maybe article title, abstract, and maybe references, and then you're still pushing the traffic from the mobile devices back to the whatever you do, people are going towards your subscription. And so that's you are there on mobile device, you have content, but it's not full text. That entails just pointing to full text on your registered text model.
One last comment: the immediacy of the mobile is, I think, appealing to the investigator, very much so, in terms of having the content. And another comment is Kristen pointed out, it's a decision too between whether you think you want to use the mobile device as a marketing tool for selling your primary content, or whether you'd see it as a secondary revenue stream, or even less of it, or even a primary revenue stream for existing content that is subscribed to elsewhere, or new content. Greg, I think that's it for me.
Perfect. I have one or two questions that come from the audience group that I'd like to pose to all four of you at this point. Rita, this one kind of spins off of the convenience issue that you had described. And this question sounds similar to me as to what had been raised when journals started to go onto the web, harkening back to John's 1995 observation. Do you think that the convenience of being able to get to publications via these mobile devices is going to overcome some concerns about the aesthetics that are involved? Particularly if you recall the simulation that Goodbinder had shown with regard to just posting up the XML component and having very plain text background for the document that was shared.
Greg, are you asking me?
I'm asking the group, so you're free to respond.
Can I take a stab at that?
Sure.
So convenience is a starting point, but behind it there's what you want to do. Convenience is the fact that you're doing it more quickly or efficiently, resolves into convenience. So my concern with what we're talking about around these devices is these devices are extremely good at getting into our workflow and actually being integral to it. And you look at some of the augmented reality types of things, the GPS, the cameras, the emails, all of these things, and I'm concerned that we're not being aggressive enough about getting content or materials that actually help somebody get something done in a format that fits the workflow as well as so many other things. So I think we can talk about repurposing content, but ultimately, I mean, journals are still random collections of articles that are only related by the basic time of submission. And that we need to kind of step it up, is my perception.
The clinical market, some publishers have been, I don't know how successful, but certainly there's been a large push for PDA at the point of care. And there's been an awful lot of investment in that area, both from publishers and from vendors. And Kent, you would probably, at this point, have more experience with that than I do. But certainly it's been an area where you take the decision tool right into the theater. And that has required a complete retooling of information and on a decision basis and a decision point of care basis. And whether that does pertain to the article, whether the journal article for the scientific researcher, who is really a different animal than the surgeon. I'm not sure. It may be the case. But certainly there may very well still be a market for reading that article because it's immediate and having the opportunity to do it anytime, any place because it's always with you if it's an iPhone or BlackBerry.
Right. So one of the things that we've done, we're building an iPhone application right now, and instead of just making it text and whatnot, we're putting our procedure videos, making them available and going through all the design and technology steps to make sure that they stream through that. Because, again, to the point, it's just a great point. I mean, aside from the fact that healthcare seems intransigently allergic to IT, which is very difficult for everybody and expensive for all of us. But we want, and we know that physicians are better when they review procedures before they do them. And we want them to be able to do that at the point of care through a handheld device. And I think that's the kind of step we need to take so that there's really real practical working knowledge put into those devices, which are really just on your belt or in your pocket, and you can get something out of it. Then they're convenient, and our information is convenient. I think it's not what some of the shoveled approaches.
I completely agree with Kent. I think we need to be more aggressive from a publisher perspective in the journals market. There's a lot more can be done to really take the information and get it across. I mean, I've been working on another pilot project with EPS in terms of how to make the content more accessible. So the devices, the handheld devices, are full of features and things you can do in terms of which could be useful for the blind people, and there's a lot more things possible with this content right now. It's just we need to be more creative in terms of what we can do. The pilot gesture was just the pilot. So these are the handheld device, especially when you can do lots of color and different features, and there's a lot of possibilities in how you want to show the content. It's just I think we are that tipping point kind of thing. We need to somebody take the lead and then show them what you can do. I think, and then the ROI, the revenue model, and the subscription model can follow.
Yeah, this is Kristen. I would add that, just to build on what others have been saying, these devices are very visually oriented. So the idea, as Kent was saying, of having the videos right there. And I think fitting in with the workflow is really critical. The journal article in and of itself can be quite an awkward package, filled with a lot more information than somebody might need in the moment in the workflow. And when you're looking at a small screen and a device that has, challenges in terms of the way you browse and move through things, how can we break down the information that's contained within the journal articles and re-present it in a way that actually fits with what people need at the moment? In the same way that a physician may want to look at a video before a procedure, someone in the laboratory may want to have a series of images available at their fingertips as they're looking in the microscope. And so I think that, understanding where people need this information in the workflow and really, as Tim was saying, get aggressive, be creative in terms of how we present it. And I don't think that this is mobile devices. I think that this should be the line of thinking in all forms of digital dissemination. What's useful on the mobile device is also useful in the web browser as well. Cutting across some of the print, legacy definitions that we live with and thinking in terms of recollecting and repackaging the content in more useful ways.
I think that's a very good observation, Kristen. And we've been into this conversation now for approaching an hour and 45 minutes. So what I'm going to do is have us wrap things up at this point. Kristen, do you have any summary items that you wish to share with the group? And then I'll step through each of the other folks as we wrap things up today.
Not really. I would just say that this is an interesting conversation, and I think it's the beginning of a dialogue that we should continue as more information starts to emerge. These are early days, and a lot of the data on the effectiveness of entering some of these channels is it's just not clear yet. But I think it's an exciting set of opportunities, and we should just continue to watch carefully and talk to each other about what's working and what isn't.
Linda?
I'm extremely excited because I've been in the XML world for such a long time, and the families see, or everybody can see actually the value you can get out of it. If you're in the structural world, all these are becoming possibilities. And I agree with Kristen, it's not just a mobile device, it's just what else you can do. How can you make it easy for a user to access the content? So I think it's developing very fast. We need to kind of keep up with the pace and see how or what we can more do with our content. But it's good to see the investment we made in early days in journals specifically and adopting XML integrated workflow that's paying for it now.
And your observations?
I would just go back, I think, to the form. We sometimes think that the form of what we do is also the function of what we do, and I would try to separate the two as we can. And work back from function to find new forms, because that's the order it's supposed to go in. And then I think also I wouldn't underestimate the power of a single purpose device. If you're in the middle of reading something on your iPhone or your phone range, you'll know what I mean. So kind of breaks your concentration. But this is very interesting.
Very good. And Rita, your observations.
Well, I think we've come up with another question for our questionnaire for our membership. I'm spent a lot of time working with clinicians over the years, and and we're all sort of familiar with the concept of, well, bullet points work, and they do in the clinical world, and certainly that works for mobile devices, and I think it would be good to take the concept to our research audience and see what they think about what might be useful for them other than the full.
Very good. I think we are at a tipping point.
Sounds like we're going to be chucked off again.
Yeah, well, just a second. We'll take care of that. I think we are at a tipping point as far as the industry is concerned. It is an exciting time. There are lots of options. I want to thank the four of you very much for your participation today. This is an excellent conversation and discussion, and I think that the audience enjoyed it greatly. So, to all, we're going to be signing off now, and those of you who are the presenters, would you please stay on the line for a few minutes afterwards for a bit of a wrap-up.
Thanks, Greg, for a great job.
Thanks, Greg.
Thanks, Greg.
This does conclude today's conference call. You may now disconnect.